So, meine Damen und Herren, vor der Pause gehen wir jetzt direkt zum Verhältnis Schweiz-EU. Sie haben es gehört, wir freuen uns alle sehr, dass Richard Jones bei uns ist, der Vertreter der EU in der Schweiz für die Schweiz und Liechtenstein. Das Stromabkommen ist nur ein Thema, das ist klar, alles wird jetzt überschattet von der Diskussion über die Personenfreizügigkeit. Was das heißt, hören wir jetzt direkt von Ihnen. A warm welcome, Ambassador Jones.
Madam Federal Councillor, Mr. President, members of the Federal Parliament, members of the cantonal authorities, ladies and gentlemen, it is a huge honour to be invited to address this very important and very prestigious meeting this afternoon. And first of all, I have to express my gratitude that I'm allowed to express myself in English. I always talk about my experiences in recent months at the dentist. You would rather go to the dentist than listen to me speak in either German or French, so believe me, this is the best way to do it. I think I've been invited to speak about the present state of play in the relationship between Switzerland and the European Union. And in my remarks, I'll begin by trying to take a big step backwards and to recall the broader context for the relationship, which I think sometimes gets crowded out in all the media coverage and reportage. Then I'll say a bit about the institutional framework for the relationship and why that is so important to the European Union. And then I shall speak about the big complicating factor, which has been mentioned most recently by the Federal Councillor, for the relationship, the implications of the vote of the 9th of February last year on mass immigration. If you forgive me, I'll say actually very little directly about electricity, but I hope you'll get an idea about how we see the present state of play and you'll be able to read between the lines about what that means for the electricity file. So first of all, the context, and the big message here for me is how much Switzerland and the European Union have in common. We're not just close to each other geographically and culturally, our political systems and our societies are also built on the same fundamental values. Democracy, the rule of law, and a social market economy are our common European heritage. Both Switzerland and the European Union are founded on the principle of settling problems between different actors by peaceful means, so much so that in the EU's case, in 2012, it was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its contribution to ensuring the stability of the continent following the catastrophe of the Second World War. Both Switzerland and the EU embrace the values of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights, and solidarity with those less fortunate than ourselves. As Switzerland is a democracy crossing borders between the individual cantons, so the EU is a democracy crossing the borders between the individual member states. The EU is built on the principle of subsidiarity. Its political system and political culture have many similarities with the Swiss system. The guiding principle for the EU is that it should only be responsible for those matters which cannot be performed more effectively at national level. So, as with the Swiss cantons, the member states retain full competence in many policy areas, such as taxation, education, and health. As in Switzerland, the decision-making process in the EU works through consensus and compromise. Like the Federal Council, the European Commission observes the principle of collegiality, and neither the Swiss nor the European Parliament are divided into government and opposition blocs, but usually decide by large and varying majorities. And the EU and Switzerland share and defend common values on the world stage. We cooperate intensively in promoting and defending these values internationally, for example, in building peace and democracy in war-torn regions, in fighting poverty, and in trying to resolve international conflicts. In global fora, such as the UN, Switzerland and the EU are close allies in combating climate change, protecting the environment, and promoting sustainable development. Now, we pursue this cooperation at a time when these shared values are under greater threat than at any stage since 1945. The barbaric outrages in recent days in Paris struck at the heart of all that Europeans hold most dear, the freedom of expression. On an almost daily basis, despicable acts are performed by insurgents in the Middle East. Russia has annexed the territory of its neighbour, Ukraine, in flagrant breach of international law and OSCE norms. And we continue to face challenges which don't conveniently and neatly stop at Europe's borders, whether legitimate competition from emerging economic giants, challenges from organised criminals, from migration flows across the Mediterranean with all the misery that they entail, from climate change. European countries stand no chance in facing these phenomena if they try to do it alone. Switzerland and the EU are also, of course, key economic partners. Our trade exchanges amount to almost 1 billion euros every working day. Switzerland is the EU's fourth largest trading partner, behind only the US, China, and Russia, but ahead of Japan, India, and Brazil. The volume of Swiss trade with Baden-Württemberg alone equals that with the US, with northern Italy is larger than with China, with Tyrol larger than with Brazil. With 56% of Switzerland's exports and 75% of its imports, the EU is by far Switzerland's largest trading partner. And Switzerland is the second largest foreign investor in the EU, while the EU is by far the largest foreign investor in Switzerland, providing 70% of all inward investment. So in terms of jobs and overall prosperity, the continuation of this successful economic relationship is crucial for both of us. But our societies are also highly interwoven. More than 1.2 million EU citizens live and work permanently in Switzerland, and almost 440,000 Swiss live and work in EU member states, in addition to the hundreds of thousands of citizens who are naturalized or who possess dual nationality. This comes from a long-standing history of labor migration in both directions, which in recent times has been facilitated by the free movement of persons. This exchange has not only been beneficial economically, but has created strong personal, social, and cultural ties between our societies. Switzerland has furthermore been a highly valued partner in the EU's research and youth mobility programs. Thanks to the excellence of its research institutions, Switzerland was a net recipient from the 7th Framework Programme between 2007 and 2013. Some 6,000 Swiss students annually benefited from the EU youth mobility programs, substantially increasing opportunities to gain experience abroad, learn other European languages, and broaden personal horizons. Unfortunately, this cooperation has not been able to continue in the manner we had hoped because of decisions following the 9th of February popular vote last year, in particular the inability of the Federal Council to sign the protocol extending the Free Movement of Persons Agreement to Croatia, and I'll say a couple of words about that later. Finally, Switzerland's enlargement contribution is an expression of solidarity which is highly appreciated by what we used to call the new member states. It's a contribution to the EU's overall cohesion and stability, adding to the 350 billion euros of the EU's own cohesion policy. Switzerland's enlargement contribution is much more than just a financial transfer. It's an investment in our common future. We hope that we can discuss soon how to renew this contribution for the years to come. So that, at a gallop, is how I see the wider context for our present relationship, that we have so much in common and we have so much to share and so much at stake. The intensity of the relationship is reflected in the intensity of our legal, contractual ties. The Treaty on European Union says that every country has the vocation to join the Union, every European country, that is, should it wish to do so. The vast majority of European countries have either joined or have applied to join, but some countries, Switzerland among them, are not pursuing that objective, and that is a decision which the European Union entirely accepts and entirely respects. After the Swiss electorate said no in 1992 to membership of the European Economic Area, Switzerland and the EU found a different path for strengthening the relationship, in particular through Swiss participation in specific areas of the EU's single market, through the so-called and famous bilateral way. I think it's worth pausing here and reflecting on the single market. To my mind, together with the EU's contribution to the peace of our continent, one of the Union's most important achievements. It really is a unique success story. By creating a unified economic space of 28 nations, extended to 31 through the EEA, with equal rules for all and governed by common institutions. It's simplified economic exchanges, it's multiplied business opportunities, and it's created millions of jobs. It's not a simple matter of eliminating customs duties, it's far more than that. It means having the same standards for products, as well as mutual recognition of product conformity procedures. This gives all firms direct access to an unprecedented market of 500 million consumers and allows those firms to compete with each other on an equal footing. So, of its very essence, the single market must be a level playing field. Therefore, it must be governed by common rules of the road, as I call them, which apply to all participants, irrespective of nationality or place of residence. Anything eroding these common rules and procedures would risk opening the door to economic protectionism and the disintegration of the single market, the last thing which Europe presently needs. The bilateral agreements between Switzerland and the EU give Switzerland privileged access to the single market which no other country outside the EEA enjoys. And this had provided a major economic boost to the benefit of both partners. But the current system of EU-Swiss agreements providing for this privileged access to the EU's internal market needs renovating. In particular, those common rules of the road which I've mentioned need to apply to Switzerland as to all other participating states. That's why, in view of Switzerland's wish to participate in further sectors of the internal market, and electricity is obviously one of them, the EU and Switzerland need to agree on adequate legal mechanisms, including an international juridical body that will ensure that these rules of the road are adopted and applied evenly. A more stable institutional foundation for our relationship would enable us to cooperate in further sectors of the internal market, again, such as electricity, to the great benefit of both partners. And negotiations towards an overarching institutional agreement were launched in May last year and have made good progress, although some important and really tricky issues remain to be resolved. But in the meantime, as we all know, the Swiss electorate voted by a slim majority in favour of the Masseneinwanderungsinitiative on 9 February last year. And this has, frankly, added a major complicating factor to our relationship. Again, it may be worthwhile to pause and give some general reflections about the importance of the free movement of persons as a principle and how it works in practice before going on to discuss the implications of the 9 February vote and where we are now. Mobility is an essential asset in the modern world. It brings economic benefits and enhances personal freedom. In the context of our bilateral relationship, as I've mentioned, the free movement of persons enables some 440,000 Swiss citizens to live and work in the EU and over 1.2 million EU citizens to live and work in Switzerland in response to the needs of the labour market. It is Switzerland's economic success and not the free movement of persons which is the main reason for the high immigration into Switzerland during recent years. The 1.2 million EU citizens living and working in Switzerland contribute substantially to this country's economic prosperity. In certain sectors, such as healthcare, their contribution is crucial. The free movement of persons within the EU has not raised unemployment nor put pressure on wages, and Switzerland's unemployment rate remains, frankly, the envy of nearly every EU member state. Furthermore, EU citizens are net contributors to the Swiss welfare system. For example, they pay 22% of total contributions to the Swiss old age and invalidity pension system, but claim only 15.1% of total allowances. This corresponds to a net contribution to the system of more than 1 billion Swiss francs per year. As for unemployment allowances and social benefits, claims by EU citizens are close to the average of Switzerland's population and much less than those of other groups of immigrants. The access of resident EU citizens to the Swiss welfare system is legitimate, since they contribute to it like everyone else. The free movement of persons isn't only of immense benefit to the economy, however. It's also a huge enhancement of individual liberty, and I think it's really important to remember this. The freedom of the European individual to choose among 32 different countries where to live and work is something which would have seemed a fantasy to people before the launch of the integration project. My parents, for example, grew up in Wales in the 1930s and 1940s, thinking that Cardiff, Manchester, and London were their widest horizons, not, as young people today think, of Warsaw, Oslo, and, indeed, Bern. Citizens from EU countries don't pose particular integration problems, as they have a similar cultural background and often have one of the Swiss languages as their mother tongue. Roughly 2/3 of them were born in Switzerland or have been living here for more than 10 years. Not least thanks to the free movement of persons within the single market, Switzerland has a lower ratio of immigrants from other cultures than many EU member states. Finally, the negative side effects of an increasing population don't result directly from the free movement of persons. The relocation of foreign firms to Switzerland, often bringing a foreign workforce with them, have often been caused rather by tax regimes designed precisely to attract such relocation. The famous overcrowded trains and a shortage of housing are a consequence of increased mobility and living space needs among the Swiss population, together with economic growth generally. These problems can be addressed by continuing to invest in infrastructure and by adapting land use planning legislation. Investments in education and vocational training, as well as incentives to raise the work rate of women and older people, will also diminish the demand for foreign labour force. And I know that these ideas are presently being studied hard by the Swiss administration, and in principle, they're fully compatible with the Free Movement of Persons Agreement. We should also be alive to how the principle of the free movement of persons works in practice, taken together with the importance of defending the position of employees within the European system. The free movement of persons gives workers the right to go to another state, to establish a business, to take up employed work, or to be sent as a posted worker. This is an individual right of every Swiss and EU adult citizen. But more freedom also leaves certain groups more vulnerable. This is especially true for workers who only come to work in another country on a temporary basis. The EU does not accept fraud and abuse at the expense of posted workers or any other form of social dumping. That's why in 1996 the EU adopted the Posted Workers Directive, which presents a core of mandatory rules regarding the terms and conditions of employment which should apply to an employee posted to work in another member state. The EU also supports a number of measures which improve the situation of workers, strengthening professional training, promoting equal pay for equal work, and enhancing the balance between work and family life. When it comes to cross-border work, the goal is also to find the right balance between the protection of workers and their individual right to free movement. We also have to ensure that such workers are not discriminated against. And we have to make sure that measures are suited to improve the situation of workers and are not, in reality, designed to allow companies to shelter themselves from legitimate foreign competition. So, to return to the situation after the 9th of February last year, and the last portion of my remarks. It's undoubtedly true that the relationship between the EU and Switzerland is being significantly tested by the acceptance of the Masseneinwanderungsinitiative. This is, however, also a chance to reflect about our relationship and really to put it on a more solid footing. As already discussed, the free movement of persons gives the right to employees and self-employed persons, together with their families, to freely choose their place of work and living in Europe, in response to the opportunities offered by labour markets. Quotas for immigration and national preference for Swiss citizens, as required by the new constitutional Article 121A, are, frankly, diametrically opposed to this basic right and principle. Therefore, they are not compatible with the obligations Switzerland assumed in the Free Movement of Persons Agreement with the EU. Since the Swiss Federal Council has up to 3 years to implement the result of the popular vote, there are no serious consequences in the immediate term for the existing EU-Swiss agreements. For the time being, the free movement of persons between Switzerland and 27 member states which are covered by the current agreement remains in place. However, as I mentioned earlier, one important consequence of the vote has been that Switzerland has not signed the protocol extending the free movement of persons to Croatia. This decision highlighted the very, very basic fact that the EU is a union which cannot accept individual member states being treated differently, one from another. I've already mentioned the consequence of this decision for Switzerland's participation in Horizon 2020 and Erasmus+. In the longer term, i.e. by 2017, the new constitutional article does seriously put into question the EU-Swiss Treaty on Free Movement of Persons, and thereby the whole current system of EU-Swiss bilateral agreements, since all of the bilateral one package of agreements regulating Switzerland's access to the EU single market are legally linked. If one agreement falls, the others automatically fall after 6 months. The EU, however, stands ready to look at Swiss ideas on how to get out of the impasse. We are emphatically not slamming the door on Switzerland. That is why the institutional negotiations, together with parallel negotiations on our electricity agreement, are continuing. That's also why we have arrived at a solution allowing partial temporary Swiss participation in the Horizon 2020 programme. And it's also why we've said that we're prepared to discuss technical aspects of the implementation of the existing Free Movement of Persons agreement. But the core principle of the free movement of persons is one of the main achievements of European integration and is a centrepiece of EU-Swiss relations. Quotas and national preference would strike at the heart of this freedom and therefore at the heart of our bilateral relationship. Our Swiss partners have come to the same conclusion, that the new constitutional provision is incompatible in this respect with the Free Movement of Persons agreement, and in the summer last year asked to renegotiate the agreement to provide for quotas and national preference. As I say, because these concepts are so diametrically opposed to the principle of free movement of persons, the EU, following consultations between the institutions and the member states, replied that renegotiation to accommodate these concepts would not be acceptable. But the dialogue between the European Union and Switzerland is continuing on all issues of common interest, including the implementation of the bilateral agreement between the European Union and Switzerland on the free movement of persons. We heard at the beginning of this afternoon the D word mentioned, or maybe not mentioned, difficult. I will say that 2015 will be a tricky year for the relationship, for the reasons that I have given, and these very, very complex, as the Federal Councillor said, very complex political questions which are all interlinked. But also because of the elections to the Federal Parliament in Switzerland this autumn, which is something which will preoccupy people quite intensively. But given all that we share and all that we have in common, and as I say, all that is at stake, particularly if you do take this step backwards and think about how we are responding to the manifold external challenges which confront our continent, I'm convinced that we will continue to engage actively with each other to try to find imaginative solutions to these outstanding issues. And if we do so, that will allow us to emerge stronger and safer together, which is, I firmly believe, where we should be. Thank you very much for your patience and for listening to me in the fifth language of the Confederation, and for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. If you want to step a little bit to the side. Maybe a question from the audience at the beginning, why does the EU insist on the free movement of people regarding that the 4 freedoms are not fully implied, not fully valid? So you can make an exception there too.
Well, for us, we've always said right from the beginning of the discussions with Switzerland following the no vote in 1992 that for us, the free movement of persons is a vital element in the relationship with Switzerland.
It's a vital principal element, but if both sides have so much in common and are profiting from each other, there should be a solution.
I firmly believe that there should be a solution. That's absolutely true. But at the same time, this is a core principle of the relationship, a core principle of our single market. As I've tried to say in my remarks, Switzerland enjoys unparalleled access to the single market, considering it's not a member of the EA. That's a great thing, but that it has a sort of membership fee, if you like, and therefore this for us is a really central point.
Given the case that really the bilateral agreement would be cut, would be abandoned, because both bodies have same interests, there would be more and new bilateral treaties. Would that be so difficult?
It's perfectly possible to conceive of something like that. I mean, it seems to me there are two major difficulties there. One is it will take time, and any delay will lead to uncertainty, and any uncertainty is highly undesirable for economic operators and therefore bad for Switzerland. The second factor is that the EU has an agenda, and I'm afraid Switzerland would not immediately leap to the top of the agenda, so that would increase the time delay. Sorry, I'll allow myself a third point. I have a feeling that if you started again from scratch, you would find yourself actually where we are now. So what's the point?
So it will be very interesting to see how that all turns out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For the moment.
Thank you very much.
Richard Jones, Ambassador. Thank you.
Bye now.